right. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Orchestrator meeting. So we have a few topics in the other pad. I think it does make sense to talk about the Ingress service, right?
Yes. Yep. So the current pull request is focused initially just on RGW. That's the only thing that it implements. I think the main thing missing right now is that there's no test coverage in Truthology. And the reason for that is because we don't have a way to allocate a virtual IP that won't conflict with other nodes that's like routable across the thing. So we need to figure out a way to allocate virtual IPs. I have a couple ideas of how to totally hack around that with some bash in the test, and make up fake private IP address IPs that sort of map onto machines so they won't conflict, but I want to do something more sophisticated there. But I'm going to start with the hack just because I think I won't rely on any other technology changes and it'll just work.
Is it sensible to implement this hack into tautology, or do we need to kind of also make this hack available to the general audience?
It would be nicest if it was part of Truthology, I think. Because it comes up I started writing the test YAML. That doesn't work obviously, but just to see what it would look like. And it has, for example, there's one part of the task does a Ceph ADM apply. Here I can share my screen. And one part does some shell to actually run some commands. And in both cases, I need to substitute in the virtual IP. So Truthology, both those tasks understood that brace VIP, brace or whatever means substitution, and could substitute in the same value there. That would be nice. But if we don't do that, then we could rely on just doing it through shell and doing the apply through the shell. But it'd be kind of annoying. So I don't know. Yeah. It's just
as we don't control NFS within our cluster, right? Unlike Kubernetes, we don't control NFS. We have to provide the way to manually specify IPs, and as the only thing for users to allocate them. We cannot create them automatically.
What do you mean can't control NFS?
DNS.
DNS, sorry. Yeah.
DNS. So in Kubernetes, you can just connect to a different service by a DNS name. And I don't think we should do that, because it would make Ceph ADM even more a copy of Kubernetes.
Yeah, and certainly for tests. I mean, I think the only time DNS really is relevant for the testing is when you're using SSL and you want the certificate to match, but whatever. Pass -- and secure to curl. But I mean, so what I was trying to write here is a test that does. I was trying to write a test that would apply. It'd create an RGW and an ingress service, substitute in a virtual IP, and then it would basically wait for them all to be active, make sure it can access it, and then it would stop and start all the backend ones and make sure things worked. Ideally, we'd also have something that would kill the keep alive D nodes, like the actual HA proxies themselves, take one of those down each in turn and make sure things behave. So that I think would be the next second half of this test. And it's not like a load test or anything. It's just make sure that it does the most basic thing. But yeah, I need to solve the virtual IP problem, so maybe I'll tackle that today.
Yeah, I missed a proper tautology integration or any kind of tautology integration for the ORDW implementation, right?
Yeah.
Gap that we had.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if the way to do this is to like somehow, I mean, we already have like a machine locking thing. We could have like virtual machines that are just virtual IPs. You just lock a virtual IP using the same basic infrastructure. But then the locking, tautology locking has to be changed so that you can lock of multiple types things. It needs to be, I mean, ideally the virtual IP would be an IP that's within the same network subnet as existing IPs, because that's how. So one of the sort of wonky things that the Ingress service does is it basically only lets you configure the virtual IP on interfaces that already have another IP, because it uses those other IPs in the networks to decide which interface to use. Those interface names vary between machines and they're unstable. They basically say it just looks for another interface in the right network, basically. And there's some stuff to like choose that, but which I think is a reasonable restriction, but you can always that later, I suppose. Anyway, I don't want to.
What do we need to support the configuration where the virtual IP is something completely different than the rest of the cluster?
So I wrote a doc about this. I mean, you can have the virtual IP be in a totally unique network, but what the documentation suggests is if that's the case, if it's in a different network than any of the existing IPs, then basically go and configure sort of fake unused IPs on those interfaces to like essentially mark the interfaces. And they can be in a totally unrelated network. So you can specify a subnet that you look for to choose the interface.
Oh, okay, so
and then
we
it'll
have
use
a
that
workaround at
interface,
least.
and then you can use a virtual, yeah. So you can just make up some private network and configure them statically on the right interfaces, and then use that as a guide selector or whatever. Yeah. So anyway, so for RGW, yeah, that's the tests. I need to get the virtual IP thing. That's the next step. I'm breaking that into a separate branch because I think the first part of it we can merge without the tautology integration. My manual tests yeah, works like a charm as far as I can tell. So somebody else should probably give it a go too before we like ship it or anything. But I haven't seen this. Well, the next piece I was going to do is the manager. Just make sure that we can set up Ingress in front of the manager, and once that standby thing merges, because we can turn off all the standby managers, and so that the HA proxy will only direct traffic at the one that is actually responding. And then so we can set up a HA manager IP basically for Prometheus or for whatever, the dashboard, REST API, whatever it may be.
Ernesto.
Yeah.
The dashboard supports having multiple Grafana backends right now, right? Or can you only configure one?
Yeah, you can only configure one. So the API, the Grafana API config setting currently only supports one URL. We talked in the past about extending that with a series of URLs or something, but it was a pending thing. So yeah, but if there is an HA proxy, then it's it's done. There is no need to do anything else there, right?
No, I think that's going to be the best solution then. Okay.
So HA proxy. I mean, I think the one that we most actually care about is NFS because actual users want that. And my thinking there is just to get the absolute most minimum thing that we can possibly do that gives you a single IP that will fail over if like things reprovision. And it might be that we're not doing any keep a, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, we might even not use keep alive D. Like it could just be Ceph ADM configuring the IP. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I have to think about that one. But.
Mike, did you have a chance to look into NFS etching?
I have the same thought Sage does, but just like a floating zip or something. But avoid keep alive D. Let NFS maintain its own application state if it can.
Yeah, it does open. Makes me a little bit nervous because the nice thing about keep alive D is that it's like we'd have to be careful basically because keep alive D when you like shut it down, it like deconfigures the virtual IP. So anything we do, we should do the same thing where it's like linked to a systemd service that will turn it off, turn the IP off when the service stops. So we don't like accidentally leak these across machines when you deconfigure, I don't know, whatever. With IP conflict. I don't know.
Yeah. Isn't there an issue with client state though, when we actually cut off one of the daemons, so you can't recover that?
Yeah, that's the challenge. Is that if you're floating an IP between different Ganeshas, the Ganeshas have to have the same rank, which means that they can't both be running at the same time. So like if you need to migrate it, then you have to stop the old one and start the new one. So that's why I think the simplest thing is probably, maybe, I'm not actually sure about this, but might be to have like Ceph ADM configure that, have like a fixed count equals 1, and if it sees the service die, it like goes and schedules it somewhere else. And the virtual IP is like literally like part of the same unit that starts up the Ganesha or something. I don't know.
Got it.
Something
yeah.
like that.
And it sets up and tears down in rank order, essentially.
Yeah.
Which I think is what Rust does. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Haven't thought too deeply about that yet.
I've made some thoughts about trying to speed up the failover when a daemon dies. We just can't use SSH for that because if you have a big cluster, then SSH is just too low, right? We are going over all hosts, mainly consisting of hosts with OSDs, and then discovering minutes later that the game has died. So that's not going to work in any case, I guess.
Like an agent model.
Yeah, we need to push the information that the NFS daemon onto Ceph ADM in order to make Ceph ADM aware of it.
And it seems like the way to make the agent model scalable is to have, probably the simplest model would be to have an agent on each host that's just responsible for like monitoring and reporting state for that. And anytime, and it's like checking containers every 10 seconds or whatever, like some high frequency. And if it ever sees a change, then it like pokes the manager and tells it. Instead of relying on the manager to like round robin across the whole cluster every 10 seconds, that would be really, yeah.
But we have to push the information onto the manager.
Yeah.
But that's also going to reduce the load, right? Because we don't fetch the host just to discover that nothing changed.
Yeah. Right.
On the other hand, we then have to care about a problem where all of a sudden all hosts are pushing changes. For that, we have to find a solution.
Yeah. Anyway, I let's see. I think this ingress and RGW stuff, we should try to get into like, Pacific.1 or .2 or whatever. And maybe the manager thing too, if it's like, I think it'll be easy. And so I'd kind of like to get that one in, but NFS will be later, next phase. Yeah. Okay. Well, I've addressed the review comment so far. I'm running it through testing again since I renamed some variables and did some cleanup. But if you guys want to take a second look at it, I guess the one thing I didn't look at actually is what happens if you have an Octopus cluster which RGWHA deployed and you upgrade. Like in theory, we could make the migrations thing try to like convert an RGWHA into an ingress. In practice, that might be hard because there isn't a full mapping of all the settings because the ingress one is simplified. But it might work. Yeah, it might work. I don't know, but I don't know if there are any users. I think it might be easier just to say like, we redid the HA. If you use RGWHA, just delete that service and deploy ingress. It's simpler and easier anyway.
We said that we're going to that the HA-RGW is still in development.
Yeah.
Especially it is so new. It was released with the latest specific release, so it's extremely new. Yeah. I'm still okay with having that one replaced. Guillaume, what do you think? You raised some concerns.
Sorry, can you say it again?
Replacing with Ingress service. That was a regression that you.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry. I didn't have time to take a look yet, but yeah, hopefully tomorrow I will be able to take a look at this. Try to not block this pair for this. I need to take a look at what we have currently in Ceph Ansible. Yeah. Sorry about that. I will try to take a look at this tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going to want to have we're going to need to have a documented process for migrating with the Ansible to Ceph ADM.
I have a migration pipeline, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole you adopt the monitors and the OSDs, and then you redeploy all the other services, blah blah blah. But we should have that process be like documented and tested, and include how to do the RGWHA in Ansible and how to replace that with the ingress controller thing in Ceph ADM. Yep. I guess probably the first thing to check is just make sure that it has sufficient flexibility. Like I simplified out a lot of random stuff that didn't seem like any real user would ever want to modify. But like the URL for the health check, like I don't know why you would ever care. But anyway, yeah.
What regarding the health check? Do we need to inform Prometheus that it also
I was wondering about that.
the HA service?
I changed it. Probably there's a change on the Prometheus law. I don't know exactly how Prometheus is configured, honestly. I made it so that it was unconditionally turned on, the Prometheus exporter endpoint in HAProxy. But I'm not sure if we have I don't know if Ceph does a thing where it helps Prometheus generate the config file so it knows what to scrape. Do we do that? Anything like that?
Yeah, we are creating the Prometheus config.
So we should include that. I'm not sure where that's done.
Oh, here's the Jinja2 template for Prometheus. And that contains the scrape configs. And we are adding the managers here, the manager Prometheus module as target. Should probably also add the new HA proxy stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Is
there anything else that we can scrape within the cluster except for the manager? And now HL proxy?
I think not currently. I think eventually we'll want to scrape. If we talked in CDS about switching to or being able to switch to a model where we're scraping all the daemons directly instead of manager, but eventually, yeah, we might have all the daemons listed there, I guess. Prometheus scrape them all direct. I think that's a separate thing. Okay.
I mean, there are things like Ganesha exporter for NFS Ganesha, right? But that's not included into anything. Yeah, might be a topic for for later release.
Yeah. Okay, so for the single host deployment one, it's basically just a few defaults, but it's a little bit it's opinionated in a slightly weird way. Like it assumes it just changes to 2x replication by default, min size 1, for example, which I think probably makes sense for a single node cluster, but not necessarily for a single OSD cluster. If you have a single OSD, then you actually want 1x replication. I don't know. I think it's probably fine for now, but we might want to do something different later. And I think the one thing missing from that pull request is I need to add a test case to the smoke case where we set that option and then deploy lots of managers. Just make sure that it works, that they all come up.
I was thinking about a new. We have a cluster, right? A cluster in a smoke test that consists of one of two hosts. Would it make sense to have a default and adding a new cluster that only consists of one host and having all the different services deployed on a single host, and then run everything also as run all the smoke tests also on that new cluster with only a single host?
Only somewhat, because like some things won't work still because they still have to deploy across hosts, like like the Ingress service with Keep Live D. I guess you can deploy it on one node, but it won't do anything.
Okay.
We only have one monitor. I don't know. I think I would just create I'll probably just create a separate directory. Well, I'll look at the existing smoke tests, but probably there need to be two sets of tests because slightly different, because some of the smoke tests don't make sense on a single node.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be nice because those tests will run more quickly. They're only one node, and probably a whole bunch of. We can probably shift a lot of those to be do everything single node unless it needs multiple nodes, or more stuff single node unless it needs multiple nodes. So it'll help speed things up too. Yeah.
So in the APEC meeting there was a discussion about making Grafana, or about dealing with Grafana being now a stateful daemon instead of a stateless daemon.
Was this morning?
Yeah, it was this morning, kind of European morning. Must be in the middle of the night for you. I don't know. I mean, having a good way to properly the Grafana database across all the daemons of that service would make sense, but I have a real trouble finding a proper backend stuff for that, right? I mean, we can't put the Grafana database into Rados because it's just not going to work. we can't.
It'll work most of the time. It'll just won't work if your cluster is very broken.
Yes, and that's when you need the monitoring.
That's when you need it the most. Yeah.
We can't store because it's too big, and Monster is not supposed to contain those blobs. So we need to find a different way to copy the Grafana database, and then I'm wondering if that's actually in scope of Ceph. Yeah. I don't know.
I think the main use case for this was just first of all, you have to have multiple Grafana instances, and then you have to customize one of them, because with a single one, you can persist that into the local storage, so you don't really need shared storage. So, it only comes down to whether we want to provide that use case or fulfill that use case. There's been some discussions on whether we want to support customized Grafana dashboards and the cost of it. And at least from a design perspective, it's adding complexity, and that's a clear example.
Right now.
And also, right, if we don't find a database across the daemons, and you have a failover, over your custom dashboards are just gone.
Yeah. I would just, I don't know. It seems like we should just document the limitation for now. Like Tim was suggesting. Like, not that many people are going to use the customized dashboards. And if they do, they can deal with moving around. That seems fine.
Yeah.
If we want to try something crazy, I think it supports SQLite. So with the Ceph SQLite support, we may try something really crazy but yeah, probably that's pure experimental and suicidal.
It has the same problem, right? You need the monitoring in the case something failed.
Yeah.
And you're only able to get things from radars if the cluster is at least not in an error state. So as soon as your cluster is broken, you can no longer access your monitoring, and that's the wrong way. So that's just not going to work. Okay. The next topic I had on my mind was NFS create --type. Mike, we've talked about that. Was it yesterday evening?
Yeah.
That's it. Let me try to find it.
This is just dropping the CLI arg when you create a daemon. Hadn't we mostly decided that this is what we wanted to do?
No, it's for volumes.
Yeah.
The type argument for volumes in NFS. Not for the daemon.
Oh, okay.
So the daemon actually doesn't accept the type. It configures for both RGW and SuffFS, but the volumes module during cluster create has a type. Right now, the only thing you can specify is a positional arg that's SuffFS. So I think my proposal is to just drop the positional arg before Pacific goes on too long. And if we feel we actually really need that during a cluster create, we can re-add it as a named arg. That would be fairly simple. But carrying it around with us long term, well, we're not sure if that's really the way we want to create these clusters. I don't know.
You're talking about the daemon arg though, right?
Not the daemon. The export type. We're talking about the export type here. That's this one here. So the volumes module takes a type argument. But we don't need that, right?
Oh, no, we need it for the export type. So this one we do want. This is the cluster create. So there's like an NFS cluster create. So this PR here.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we do want this one.
Mm-hmm. So the exports. So in my mind, I kind of think about it in a way that like the orchestrator should be responsible for the service, the NFS service, and then the volumes module can have just like a simple like hook right into that for its cluster create, and then all of the other export type logic should reside up in this volumes module. Kind of do a separation that way, concerns between the components.
What's the backward compatibility thing that Varsha was mentioning? I don't understand what she means.
I think she means because we went out in Octopus with the CLI. And so I think we could maybe read it.
I think we just have a release note that the CLI changed. I think that's it. Seems like an easy one. Yeah.
Yep. And then we tackle the RGW block keyring stuff like somewhere elsewhere.
Yeah, I think so. Should I remove the DNM thing from this and test it?
Yeah, if you're okay with it. I'd like to move forward with this one. I think it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
I think after this, I'll try and find some time with Varsha, maybe, whoever else. And then we'll talk about the RGW block some more. If we can get resolution there.
I think the one thing to add to that pull request would be just a quick note in the pending release notes that the CLI changed.
Okay, I'll do that today.
So it ends up in the release notes.
Yep.
Okay. Now go to the next topic. That's said you added that one. NFS, NCW, NFS, ASCII, and Ingress.
Nothing real substantial here. Just that I think we want to make sure that the Ceph ADM smoke or Ceph ADM suite in general should have a full smoke coverage. Try to cover everything. And there's still some gaps on NFS, WNFS. I think actually we deploy iSCSI.
We do.
Might be okay.
Yeah. We also deploying NFS, but not in the smoke test, but in the DRI test. So we have proper NFS coverage in the Ceph ADM suite, not in the smoke test, but in the Ceph ADM suite itself.
A couple of weeks ago, I added a PR for the smoke in the Ceph ADM test for NFS. Don't know if that's sufficient. Yeah,
yes, cool.
Just trying to close that gap too. That way we're testing both at the orchestrator layer and then also at the volumes layer. And then I think the next thing is like kind of more of an end-to-end test. I was going to add something like that, kind of like how we with FFS, where we kind of run through and mount it and then generate some IOPS.
So I'm wondering with these if we should move away from this model where we have all the special support in the Ceph ADM task and instead replace it with just like an apply and you give it the spec.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But if we want to continue having those kind of traditional cluster specification in tautology, then we need deploying a cluster using the spec file makes more sense to me, right? But that's not how Ceph. That's not how tautology works.
Yeah, I think we should be moving away from the role thing. I mean, the main thing that the role gives you, now that Ceph ADM is in the picture, the main thing that it gives you is that you can have like a server name in there, and then in your client task where you're like a fuse mount or what NFS client mount or whatever, you can just refer to the role name and it figures out who it is. But I think we can accomplish the same thing by adding support to those tasks so that it'll go ask the cluster, ask Ceph ADM, like what's the endpoint, where is the daemon configured, whatever. So I think we should move towards that. Like even the RGW one that's in there right now, like I think we should drop it. I mean, we have to update a bunch of tests, but it seems like the better direction to go in. The only real thing that cephadm.py really needs to understand is how to deploy, how to do the bootstrap, and I guess mostly the OSDs even, like even the configuring additional monitors, like we could probably remove, well, I don't know, it might not be worth it, but, and the managers, like adding additional managers, like we could probably do away with some of that stuff.
Logging is also part of the Ceph task.
Oh yeah, actually, yes, that is one thing that it does well, captures all the daemon logs. So I don't know.
Makes sense, right? But have time to do that right now, or when should we do? When should we do that? Right?
I mean, we could have, yeah. I mean, we could try to do both. I don't know. I just the thing with this mode is that like it's a slightly different. It ties you to the roles configuration, so it makes the test less flexible, and it like means that we don't test the automatic placement scheduling stuff. Although that might not matter. I think the placement is relatively well covered with the unit tests.
Yeah. I don't think that we need to have too much coverage of the placement in tautology.
Yeah.
It's worth it, right? We can test the placement in the unit test so much more in depth than we can ever think about having it in tautology.
Yeah. Like I guess this particular test case could be replaced with a bit of YAML in the cephadm smoke role list. There's a directory that has services, and you could just add a nfs.yaml in there, and it could just be cephadm.apply and then the spec, and like that's it basically.
Mm-hmm.
Without adding this code, I think we should do that instead. And then the point at which we want the end-to-end test where it actually gets mounted, we'll have to add support to the NFS client task so that it can discover what the NFS endpoint is, which we can gather from the OrchPS output or OrchLS if we are using HA eventually.
Yeah, that was something that Vasha requested early on, to have the IP of the host accessible in OrchPS, but we never managed to do it. Too many bugs at the time. Okay. I found the working on vstart-dev cephadm plus containerized host. Ernesto.
Yeah. Well, this is just to share this. He's trying to run a more realistic vStar-based environment from a laptop-sized environment rather than a VM-based or something requiring some bare metal environment. So the idea is just to run vStar plus the cephadm flag and also deploy new hosts from containers. So he is just trying this Docker in Docker thing with systemd and all the complexities around that. So, but I think the outcome it can be very useful for avoiding the KCLI approach, and also having a multi-host environment with Ceph ADM on VStart.
That sounds great. I mean, if it works, right? Having that kind of Docker in Docker to simulate virtual hosts would make it possible to just link or mount the Python files into the containers while still just coding on your local machine in a virtual multi-host setup. That would be great.
Yep. Let's see how far we get with this. I tried that a while ago, and the first issue I faced was the creating OSDs from loopback devices. So that was an issue I faced with Ceph Volume. So, but Alfonso is trying. I tried that from Ceph ADM Bootstrap, and he's trying this from VStart. So maybe he's luckier than I was with this approach.
Okay.
A mode in Ceph Volume called raw, which lets you just pass a raw block device. It doesn't do any of the LVM stuff.
Okay.
That you might want to try. That's what Rook does.
Good to know.
Simplifies things.
But it can be a regular loopback device, or it has to be.
Yeah, it could be. I think it can be anything. I'm not sure. It's not really. I don't think Ceph ADM supports it, so we might need to apply some work on the Ceph ADM side to make sure you can actually do that. But because it basically like bypasses all the drive group stuff. Like it's just.
I will share it with Alfonso.
There is a command OSD activate host that will just create the OSD daemons based on what was deployed by Ceph Volume. So you can have a first command that just calls Ceph Volume in a raw mode, and then just don't create any systemd units. And then as a second step, call Ceph OSD activate with the host, and then suddenly all your OSD should appear.
That would be nice.
That means that you can do any Ceph Volume commands. That was implemented because users went into the problem when reinstalling their host OS, and then they needed a way to recreate all the existing OSDs, all the OSD daemons, based on what was deployed.
So in that case, the Ceph Volume raw mode probably already works if you just do that. If you create the BlueStore OSD or whatever manually, and then cool.
Okay, any other topics for today? Nothing. Thank you very much. Have a nice week.
Bye.
Bye. This tomorrow or in a week.
Hey guys. Bye.
Bye.